I once believed that love was everlasting, that it would endure through any storm. But that all changed one fateful night when I walked in on her in his arms, laughter spilling out like it was the most natural thing in the world, as if I had never existed. The woman I once called my world had transformed into a stranger, and the man who shattered everything I had built lived just across the street, wearing a smug smile every damn day. I had trusted her, loved her deeply, but she buried that trust beneath every kiss they shared. Now, I stood at a crossroads, revenge or forgiveness? But what do you do when your heart has already been shattered? You pick up the pieces, sharpen them, and prepare for whatever comes next. As I sat at my computer, trying to figure out how to share my story, I realized that many people might not believe me at first. I had my doubts about what had happened to my father, but the more I reflected on it, the more convinced I became that his story needed to be told. Even now, 7 years later, I missed him deeply, and I loved him just the same. I hesitated to speak out, knowing that some might dismiss his experiences. Yet, I felt it was essential to document them, if only so my children could learn a little about their grandfather. This tale begins 9 years ago, with a visit to the bank that would change everything. I was sitting in an office, waiting for the manager to retrieve the bank's lawyer. They needed to confirm the court order that stated my father had passed away. It was surreal, waiting there in that sterile room, surrounded by the scent of polished wood and financial paperwork. In my hands, I held the only note I had received from my father in those 7 years. It was written in his familiar handwriting, and all it bore was the name of the bank. The key in my pocket felt heavy with meaning, a key to a safe deposit box I never even knew existed. How could it be that it had been 7 years since my dad had vanished? Some people speculated that something terrible had happened to him, others thought he had met with an accident, his body yet to be found. Then there were those who insisted he had simply left to escape his ex-wife. That idea always struck me as ridiculous. My father cared deeply for her, and I couldn't imagine him abandoning her like that. But the truth was, I had no idea what had happened to him. It felt like he had simply evaporated into thin air. I suppose I should introduce myself. My name is Jake Stanton, and my father's name was Mike Stanton. I was at the bank today due to 2 significant events that had unfolded just a week apart. 1 week and 1 day ago marked the 7th anniversary of my father's disappearance, which meant we could finally begin to address his estate. The very next day, I received the key and the note that would lead me here, to this very moment. The safe deposit box was at a bank far from where I lived, a place I had no knowledge of until that key arrived in my hands. My decision to visit the bank took a little longer than I expected, as I needed to gather the official documents from the courts. Now, here I was, sitting in the manager's office, my mind racing with curiosity about what my father might have stored away in that box. I knew my sister Tanya and I were the only ones who would inherit anything from our father's estate, but I was frustrated that she was the one managing it. She seemed intent on selling the ranch, a decision that left me feeling unsettled. Can she even do that? I wondered aloud, tapping my fingers against the polished surface of the desk. My lawyer had warned me that if the IRS got involved, they might push for a sale, and that worry gnawed at me. My sister and I had never shared a close relationship. Being 2 years older, Tanya often saw me as the easy target for her teasing. There was a time, not long after my father disappeared, when I was just 9 years old. Tanya had friends over for a sleepover, and she told them she had seen me without clothes, making jokes that left me burning with embarrassment. The girls teased me relentlessly that Saturday, and by the time night fell, I was determined to get even. That evening, as the girls chatted in their pajamas, I sneaked into Tanya's room and sprinkled itching powder into their clothes. I even sprinkled some on the outfit she had set out for the next day. The next morning, they woke up for breakfast and planned a trip to the mall, but they ended up itching uncontrollably and couldn't leave the house. My mom was furious, but my dad found it hilarious. The girls ended up taking showers and washing their clothes multiple times, but the itching lingered, leaving them with one memorable sleepover story. You'd think my sister would take that as a hint to ease off, but no such luck. Our teasing turned into a constant back and forth. Tanya became increasingly clever with her pranks, often managing to pull one over on me before I even realized it. One memorable instance occurred when Tanya took my pet lizard and snuck it into my parents' bed. When my mom found it, she was livid, and I ended up in trouble for not locking the cage properly. I initially felt guilty, thinking I had failed to secure it. That was until I caught sight of Tanya smirking at my mom's anger. In retaliation, I dropped a bug down the back of her shirt one day. The sight of her flailing around, trying to get it out, was priceless. I got grounded for a week, but I couldn't help but grin every time I saw her. Through all the teasing, I learned one crucial lesson: women could be incredibly clever. My mom demonstrated this repeatedly in her interactions with my dad, especially toward the end of their marriage. It wasn't until I met Jenny that I began to open up and trust a woman again. Even then, my fear of disappointment nearly jeopardized my marriage. Now, as I waited in the bank, I couldn't shake the sense that my father's story was still unfinished. I had no idea what secrets the safe deposit box might hold, but I was ready to uncover them. This journey, rooted in loss and pain, was about to reveal more than just the contents of a box. It was about understanding who my father really was and, ultimately, who I had become. Jenny was my everything, and despite my fears, I mustered the courage to ask her to marry me. To my relief, she eagerly accepted, her eyes sparkling with excitement. But beneath that joy, the doubts instilled in me by my mother began to surface, creating a rift between Jenny and me. One fateful day, Jenny approached me with a serious look on her face. "Jake," she said softly, "we need to talk." My heart raced, anxiety gnawing at me. I braced myself for what I feared might be bad news. "What do we need to talk about?" I managed to ask, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're making me anxious with all your doubts," she replied, her honesty piercing through my defenses. "If you can't trust me, then we can't have a future together." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had thought I was hiding my worries well, but I quickly realized how wrong I was. Our relationship was on shaky ground, and it was time for me to face the truth. I had a choice: deny the reality or be honest. I chose honesty. "You're right," I admitted quietly. "I do have issues. My mother left my father for someone else, and it hurt him deeply. It's hard for me to get over that." Jenny knelt beside me, her eyes glistening with tears. "Jake, I'm not your mother. I would never betray your trust. But we need to find a way to overcome your fears. Would you consider seeing a counselor with me?" Seeing the love in Jenny's eyes eased some of my worries. I could feel how much she cared for me. "Okay," I agreed. "Let's do it." She arranged everything with a therapist named Margaret Hogan, someone we knew from the hospital. Jenny was there for every appointment, standing by me as I faced my demons. With each session, Margaret and Jenny helped me navigate through my feelings. I remember one visit vividly. Clarity washed over me. The counselor asked, "What scares you the most?" "I fear that Jenny will find someone better than me," I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. "I love her so much, and I don't know how I would cope if that happened." Jenny took my hands, her voice trembling with emotion. "Jake, if I ever lost you, my life would be incomplete. I promise I will never leave you unless you ask me to. But please, don't ever ask that. I love you completely." In that moment, we embraced, sharing our fears and hopes. After we calmed down, Margaret helped us sort through our thoughts for another half hour. From that day on, my worries began to ease. While I can't say my trust is perfect, I know I trust Jenny very much. If I had to put a number on it, I'd say my faith in her is 99.9%. Reflecting on my childhood, I realized I had never fully trusted my mother. There was always a distance between us, even though I knew she loved me and cared for my sister Tanya as well. But it was clear that Tanya was my mother's favorite, and that left me feeling a bit left out. Our family had its ups and downs, but the first time I noticed my mom's selfishness was unforgettable. I'll never forget the day Tanya had a 4th grade play. My mom forgot all about it because she had set up a hair appointment for the same time. She and Dad were also supposed to attend a big event at the hospital called the Blue and White Ball. When Mom realized the mix-up, she decided to keep her hair appointment. Changing it would mean losing her favorite stylist, and there was no doubt in her mind about which priority came first. I remember watching as Tanya peeked out from behind the curtain, searching for Mom. Despite our sibling squabbles, I felt a pang of sympathy for her. The sadness in Tanya's eyes when she realized Mom wasn't coming was heartbreaking. That day led to one of the few big arguments I remember between my parents. Mom just didn't understand why anyone was upset. Dad was genuinely angry, and they didn't speak for days. Eventually, Dad patched things up with Mom, and she took Tanya out for a special day of lunch and shopping. I knew she was trying to win back Tanya's affection, and somehow, it worked. I kept my distance from Mom but shared a strong bond with Dad, built on love and respect. He treated Tanya like a princess, but if she had to choose, I was sure she'd pick Mom. From Dad, I learned everything I know about ranching. He instilled in me a love for the land and all it offered. I started helping him as soon as I could. We were incredibly close, and even now, 7 years after he disappeared, I still feel the pain of his absence. Mom had created a divide in our family, and I hadn't spoken to her for 2 years before Dad went missing. I still haven't talked to her since. Our split was so serious that I didn't invite her to my wedding, and I wouldn't let her meet my kids. My wife Jenny and I have 3 boys, and it felt like only a matter of time before Mom did something that hurt Dad. Mom, whose full name was Ashley Blackley, came from a very different background than Dad. He was born into a large, loving family, while she was the only child of Jonathan Blakely, a successful builder, and his stay-at-home wife, Carol. My grandfather John and his wife started the ranch, which is a key part of Dad's estate. John got the 100 acres from his parents, who bought it from a neighbor during the Great Depression. Even though the land wasn't used at the time, the ranch began with that 100 acres, 10 cattle, and 2 horses. My grandfather built their first house by hand, and while it was under construction, they lived in a simple trailer. Little by little, they improved the ranch, and when my dad took over, it had grown to cover a little more than 14,000 acres, with over 2,000 cattle and 25 horses, along with other animals. Throughout their marriage, my grandparents had 6 children: Sam, Karen, Bobby, Kelly, Heather, and my dad. It was a caring family where everyone looked out for one another. If anyone picked on one of the Stanton kids, they knew they'd have to deal with the other 5. As time passed, all the kids eventually got married and moved away, except for Heather and my dad. Tragically, Heather died in an accident when she was just 17. Even years later, whenever Dad spoke about her, it was clear they shared a strong bond. He would often get emotional, reminiscing about their time together. My dad realized how deeply he loved her, and that loss shaped him in ways I still struggle to comprehend. As I navigated my own relationship with Jenny, the echoes of my childhood experiences lingered in my mind, reminding me of the importance of trust and communication. My journey with Jenny had its challenges, but with every step we took together, I felt the walls I had built around my heart starting to crumble. Love was a risk, but it was a risk worth taking. From a young age, my dad dreamed of becoming a rancher. It was a passion that thrilled my grandparents, who had devoted their lives to building a family legacy on the land. However, fate dealt a cruel hand when my grandfather passed away from a heart attack just a little over a year after my dad graduated high school. Even though Dad was still in college, he stepped up to manage the ranch, taking on responsibilities that were far beyond his years. At the same time, my grandmother began teaching him the ropes of their various business ventures. Sadly, she would also pass away almost 10 years later, shortly after my dad got married. My grandfather was an extraordinary man. Besides running the ranch, he established a feed store on a busy road and became a co-owner of the local drugstore, which was a cornerstone of the community. Over the years, he acquired several other businesses, but those details, while interesting, aren't the heart of this story. To me, my dad was my hero. He wasn't a celebrity or wealthy, he was simply a man who was always there for me, ready to lend a hand or share his wisdom. His intuition was remarkable, he always seemed to know exactly what I needed, and my love for him mirrored that of any boy for his father. However, my feelings toward my mother became more complicated after she left our family. While Dad wasn't famous, he was well known in our community for his athletic prowess. He might not have had what it took to go pro, but he was undeniably talented. My father was the starting quarterback for Clifton High School for 3 years, and that experience would prove pivotal, as it marked the beginning of his later struggles in marriage. Clifton High's football team was a tight-knit group of local ranch and farm boys who prided themselves on their strength. But everything changed when my dad took on the role of quarterback. Standing at 5 feet 11 inches and weighing around 180 pounds, he didn't have the strongest arm on the field, but he made up for it with quick thinking and agility. He committed to practicing with his teammates for at least an hour every day during the summer, honing his skills. By the time fall practice rolled around, my dad and his teammates were ready to take on the season. Great quarterbacks possess a unique combination of traits: a strong arm, intelligence, determination, height, and precision. A keen observer of the game will notice that a successful quarterback often releases the ball just before the receiver makes their cut. My father excelled in this aspect, displaying remarkable intuition that allowed him to thrive, even though he was shorter and less physically imposing than many of his opponents. In our county, Clifton High and Chester Academy were the two premier football programs, but they didn't face off during the regular season due to being in different leagues. Instead, they frequently clashed in the playoffs, leading to a fierce rivalry. The differences between the two schools were stark. Clifton was your typical high school, rooted in the community, while Chester catered to the wealthiest families, attracting elite athletes from 5 nearby counties and beyond. For instance, Tucker Morris, often referred to as Tuck, transferred to Chester after his family relocated for his father's job. Tuck quickly made a name for himself as a standout player, leading his previous team to the playoffs for the first time in a decade. He played both offense and defense, skillfully juggling the roles of quarterback and lead linebacker. With his impressive athleticism, it was no wonder Chester had its sights set on him. After the move, Tuck's father became the vice president at a local bank, further solidifying the family's status in the community. As summer faded into fall, the tension between Tuck and my dad began to simmer, especially as the two would soon face off on the field. Their first encounter occurred one evening at Rosie's Burger and Dog, a beloved hangout for local students. That night, a group of Chester football players brought Tuck along, and my dad later described them as loud and rowdy. Tuck had a reputation for being a bit cocky, strutting around like he owned the place. As he wandered through the diner, he created a scene, snatching fries from other patrons' tables and making a spectacle of himself. My father might have overlooked this childish behavior, but then Tuck made the mistake of targeting Becky Cummers. That night, Becky was out with Simon Ballard, a good friend of my father's who had a crush on her. Though Simon wasn't a football player, he was hard-working and kind, and he had plans to marry Becky after college, dreaming of a future with 4 kids. Tuck strolled over to their table, towering over them with his athletic build, exuding the confidence of a star player. He was known for his powerful arm and speed, but my father harbored doubts about Tuck's true strength. He suspected that Tuck hadn't faced many real challenges in his life and questioned his intelligence, even as he acknowledged Tuck's raw talent on the football field, a talent that could likely earn him a Division I scholarship and perhaps a future in professional sports. As Tuck continued his antics, he approached Simon and Becky's table and began to annoy them. Becky stood her ground, making it clear she wouldn't tolerate his disrespect, prompting Simon to rise in defense of her. Tuck, not one to back down, escalated his aggression. In a quick motion, he shoved Simon, sending him crashing to the ground. That was all my father needed to see. Without a second thought, he jumped up and confronted Tuck, and in a flurry of adrenaline and anger, they found themselves grappling on the floor. My father landed 2 solid punches on Tuck before things settled down, but the tension in the air had already shifted. The rivalry that had started as a competitive spark was now ignited with personal animosity, and as the football season approached, the stage was set for a showdown that would resonate beyond the field, impacting both their lives in ways they could never have predicted. Before they were pulled apart, Tuck didn't handle the confrontation well. That moment sparked a fierce rivalry between him and my father that only intensified as the new school year approached. Tuck felt my dad had acted unfairly during their initial encounter, so just 3 days later, he challenged him to a meeting. My father was the kind of man who never backed down from a challenge, so he agreed to meet Tuck beneath the highway overpass. News of their showdown spread like wildfire through the halls of school. By the time the meeting rolled around, at least 200 kids had gathered, eager to witness what they thought would be an easy victory for Tuck. He was larger than my dad and had a reputation as a fighter. He had bullied others and never faced someone willing to push back. This only fueled Tuck's arrogance, and he boasted to his friends that he would easily take my dad down. But what Tuck didn't realize was that my father had skills of his own. As the crowd buzzed with excitement and anticipation, the 2 men circled each other, eyes locked, tension in the air. What everyone expected to be an all-out brawl quickly turned into something far more tactical. Tuck swung wildly, trying to overpower my dad with brute force, but my father was patient, dodging punches and moving with grace. He understood that in a fight, timing was everything. As Tuck continued to throw reckless punches, my father patiently waited for the right moment. When Tuck finally got off balance, my dad stepped in and delivered a powerful blow that sent Tuck crashing to the ground, struggling to catch his breath. The fight was over, but the animosity between the two had only deepened. In my father's sophomore year, he met Ashley Blackley, the girl who would later become my mother. Ashley's father was a small but burgeoning developer in town, and she had just started at the school when my dad was a freshman. Their paths didn't cross until the following year, but once they did, it was clear Ashley was drawn to my dad. He was a star athlete, popular and confident, and she found that magnetic. That football season was electric. Both Clifton and Chester dominated their regular games. They faced off in the regional finals, where Chester came out on top, 31-24. Tuck, the quarterback for Chester, threw for nearly 400 yards, but few noticed that my father had thrown for over 400 yards as well. Unfortunately for Clifton, they missed their chance to compete for the state championship after that game. Amidst the heartbreak of defeat, my father found himself infatuated with Ashley. It seemed she had feelings for him too, and they soon began dating seriously. But after Clifton's loss in the regionals, Ashley's attention shifted. She started dating Tuck, and the fact that she left my father for his rival was a bitter pill for him to swallow. This betrayal deepened my father's dislike for Tuck, but what he didn't realize was that Ashley often put herself first, even after the way she treated him. To be fair, not many people saw that side of Ashley. When I was younger, I couldn't understand the distance that grew between my dad and her. But as I grew older, I started observing my mother more closely. She had a unique talent for making people feel important and cared for, even when she was ultimately turning the conversation back to herself. She was so adept at this that most didn't even notice. For a long time, I thought my mom simply loved my dad. Over time, I came to see that while she did love him in her own way, her love for herself was even more profound. It certainly helped that my dad was well respected and successful, moving in important circles. While it's true he didn't enjoy those social events, he went along with them because he loved her. He liked being part of community activities, like the blue and white ball. Ashley was an attractive girl, and as time went on, she blossomed into a stunning woman. She had a charm that made people stop and take notice. While she was married to my dad, I heard whispers about her getting close with other men. My dad never talked about it, but I could sense there was some truth behind those stories. I had seen my mom use her charm to get what she wanted, and I couldn't help but think she might have done the same with others if it suited her. Ashley had shown herself serving nature even in high school. Even though my dad was dating her, she gravitated toward Tuck, who helped her gain more popularity. She broke up with my dad to be with Tuck, and that hurt him deeply. Still, my father managed to move on. After the breakup, my dad threw himself into his work at the ranch and preparing for the upcoming football season. This kept him busy and helped distract him from thoughts of his old girlfriend. As the next football season rolled around, both Chester and Clifton had high hopes. They played well during the regular season, remaining unbeaten, and once again faced each other in the divisional finals. In that game, Chester emerged victorious with a score of 27-24. Tuck threw for an impressive 432 yards, making the winning pass in the final minute. Some people conveniently forgot that the defender slipped during that pivotal moment and overlooked that my dad also had a standout game, throwing for 404 yards and leading his team to score, putting Clifton ahead 24-20 with less than 4 minutes left. In those tense final moments, my father brought his team to Chester's 11-yard line. On the last play, he made a brilliant pass, but his receiver couldn't hold onto the ball. The debate has raged on for years over whether the receiver could have scored, given that there were two defenders nearby. I believe he might have, but I know I could be biased. Few remembered that Chester lost their next game after that showdown. With Ashley still at Clifton, my dad saw her almost every day. After getting over their breakup, he started dating other girls, but none ever captured his heart quite like Ashley did. Eventually, he decided to respect Ashley's choices and just be friends with her, but deep down, he couldn't help but feel a lingering connection. My dad's senior year at Clifton High turned out to be the best time of his life, but not without its share of drama. He was elected captain of the football team and also became president of the student council, which gave him quite a bit of influence in school. During the Halloween dance, he and my soon-to-be mom were crowned king and queen, a moment my dad cherished. However, he remembered that Tuck wasn't pleased when they took to the dance floor for their first dance together. My dad had a fleeting moment with Ashley during that dance, and he thought she enjoyed it, which only added to the tension between him and Tuck. The football season that year was like a dream come true for my dad. Clifton dominated the regular season, winning every game and building excitement among the fans. Tuck, on the other hand, was also excelling with Chester, winning every match by a wide margin. As the playoffs approached, a highly anticipated championship game was set between Clifton and Chester, intensifying the rivalry between my dad and Tuck. Tuck had been playing both offense and defense, showing off his impressive skills. Many believed he was waiting to see where Ashley would attend college before making his choice about which scholarship to accept. Though he had a reputation for being self-centered, some people believed he genuinely cared about Ashley's future. The state championship was a significant event, held in a massive stadium near the Capitol and broadcast on television throughout the state. By then, Tuck had numerous scholarship offers from top-tier football programs, but he hadn't made his choice yet. There was an air of anticipation surrounding the game, as both teams had performed exceptionally well throughout the season. The first half of the championship game was packed with action, showcasing Tuck's and my dad's talents as they combined for a staggering 680 passing yards. However, both teams struggled with their ground games. Clifton faced a tough defense, while Tuck shone as a middle linebacker for Chester, making key plays that drew attention from college scouts. Despite their past differences, my dad recognized Tuck's skills as he challenged him at every turn, playing aggressively. Back then, protections for quarterbacks were limited, and Tuck took advantage of that, pressuring my dad relentlessly. Yet, my dad's determination shone through as he got back up with a smile after each hit, which only seemed to infuriate Tuck more. A crucial penalty on Tuck for unnecessary roughness would later play a pivotal role in the game's outcome. With the score tied at 31-31, Clifton found themselves in a critical 4th and goal situation on the Chester 3-yard line. Instead of opting for a field goal, which many thought would be a safer choice, the Clifton coach decided to go for a pass play. Chester's defense was ready, forcing my dad to scramble. He finally spotted Randy Thompson in the far corner of the end zone and threw the ball just as Tuck barreled into him. The hit was brutal. My dad felt a wave of dizziness wash over him as he slowly got back to his feet, spotting the penalty flag fluttering on the ground. Tuck had been called for unnecessary roughness. My dad's pass, however, had gone slightly over Randy's reach, landing at the 1-yard line. The Clifton coach, determined to push forward, called 3 running plays in a row, but Tuck blocked each attempt, and Clifton only advanced half a yard. As the third quarter ended, the coach faced a tough decision on whether to keep pushing or change the game plan. The fourth quarter began with Clifton clearly eager to score again. The coach opted for another pass play, but once again, Chester's defense was prepared. My dad, now under immense pressure, had to run with Tuck hot on his heels. I must have replayed that moment 100 times. Just as Tuck closed the distance, my dad turned and ducked, but Tuck's knee collided with my dad's helmet, causing him to stumble. In a moment that would become legendary, my dad pushed through the pain and managed to dive into the end zone. No one realized just how much damage had been done in that instant. After resting for a couple of plays, Tuck returned to the game, but he wasn't moving as well as before. As both teams' defenses tightened, the only other points scored came from a Chester field goal, leaving the game hanging in the balance with just under 9 minutes left. When Clifton got the ball again, my dad focused on the Chester secondary, hoping for a clean pass. But one of his throws got tipped and went straight to Tuck, who seized the opportunity to run down the field, seemingly clear for a touchdown. Despite Tuck's slower pace due to his earlier injury, my dad sprinted after him, catching up just in time for a fierce collision at the 20-yard line. In a surprising twist, my dad not only managed to catch Tuck but also made a crucial play that caused Tuck to drop the ball. Clifton regained possession, and from there, it was clear how it would end. They scored again, sealing the game with a final score of 45-31. It was Clifton's first, and so far only, state championship victory. As for Tuck, things took a downward turn after the game. With his inability to play anymore, his father was let go from his coaching position shortly after Tuck's graduation. They made this change to avoid any suspicion, which surprised many but prompted no action. Tuck's dad moved to California for a new job, and the colleges that had once shown interest in Tuck gradually faded from memory, except for one, Northwestern University. They were willing to give Tuck a chance, but he would have to start as a walk-on. If he impressed the coaches, a scholarship could be in his future. Tuck worked diligently to recover, but he never regained his former prowess on the field. Sadly, he didn't make the Northwestern team, and after that, my dad lost touch with him. Meanwhile, Ashley had re-entered my dad's life, having mostly ended her relationship with Tuck about a month after the state championship game. The past had shifted, and the dynamics of their lives were forever changed, leaving my dad with memories of a glorious season and a bittersweet rivalry. It was the championship game when everything began to unravel. My father was already struggling with his injuries and had been in a sour mood for weeks. His disappointment cast a long shadow over our family, and it felt like we were all just waiting for the storm to break. A month or two later, things took an unexpected turn when he reconnected with Ashley. They started dating while my dad finished his 2-year degree in animal care at a local college. Meanwhile, Ashley had attended State University but left after her first year, feeling lost among the sea of students. Their romance blossomed quickly, and they got married just a month after Dad graduated. Not long after, Ashley was expecting my sister. I was born 2 years later, and from what I can gather, those first 14 years of their marriage were filled with happiness for my dad. However, I couldn't quite grasp how my mother felt about it all. Sometimes she was warm and loving, but at other times, she seemed distant and preoccupied. My father did his best to keep the peace, accommodating her needs while standing up for himself when she pushed too hard. That's when Tuck returned to town. His father had moved to California years earlier, where he found success as a bank employee before transitioning to a stockbroker and eventually starting his own company. Tuck had worked hard, applying everything he had learned to buy banks in our state. When he returned, he stepped into the role of executive vice president, working alongside his father to oversee the banks in the southern part of the state. For the first year and a half, life remained relatively stable. My mother often mentioned Tuck, especially when his picture appeared in the local paper. Tuck, eager to reconnect with her, found himself increasingly busy with his father's enterprise. But once the banks were settled, he made his move. He didn't waste time in asking my mother to help organize the annual blue and white ball. I later discovered that soon after that event, a secret relationship had begun to blossom between them. Tuck was married, with a lovely wife and 2 kids of his own, which added an extra layer of complexity to the situation. My father was inherently trusting, often giving people the benefit of the doubt, so when Tuck approached my mother, he didn't suspect a thing. However, over time, Dad began to sense something was off. The hurt he felt was palpable, and after much contemplation, he decided to hire a private investigator. It didn't take long for the investigator to uncover the truth. You might expect this revelation to lead to dramatic confrontations or serious consequences, but the reality was much more muted. People felt sympathy for my dad but continued to socialize with both Tuck and my mom. When my father finally confronted Tuck's wife with the truth, she chose to divorce him. I later learned it cost Tuck significantly to settle things, but the details remained shrouded in privacy. Their 2 kids went with their mother to a new place, and from what I understood, Tuck rarely saw them afterward. What I remember most vividly from this ordeal was the conversation my dad had with my mom. I can almost recite their words verbatim. One day, after school, my mom picked my sister Tanya and me up, and when we got home, Dad was sitting at the dining room table, papers spread out in front of him. "Kids, go upstairs. I need to talk to your mother," he said, his voice steady but laced with a tension I could sense even from my hiding spot. Tanya shot a glance at Dad, then our mom, before dutifully heading to her room. I pretended to follow but instead stayed quietly at the bottom of the stairs, straining to hear. Dad placed the papers in front of Mom and looked her squarely in the eye. "How could you do this? Doesn't our marriage matter to you?" My mother glanced at the papers and sighed. "I'm sorry you found out this way. Tuck wanted to wait until he could talk to his wife before I spoke to you, but now it seems that won't happen. To answer your question, our marriage meant something, but it's over now. It's time for both of us to move on. You've always known I cared for Tuck. Then why did you marry me?" My dad's voice remained calm, but I could see the hurt etched into his features from where I was eavesdropping. "I cared for you, but I care for Tuck more. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said, her tone dismissive. Dad sighed, shaking his head. The pain in his eyes stirred something deep within me. Before that day, if you had asked me whether I loved my mother, I would have said yes without hesitation. But in that moment, as I witnessed her betrayal, my love for her began to wane, overshadowed by an overwhelming sense of loyalty to my father. "Well, I guess we should discuss the details of your divorce," I heard Dad say, his voice calm but distant. I was astonished by how composed he was despite the devastating revelation. "What do you want?" Dad asked, his eyes narrowing. Mom gave him a look that made her intentions clear. "I want half. This is a no-fault state, and I'm entitled to half of everything, including the ranch." To my surprise, Dad chuckled softly, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "That's not going to happen, Ashley." "Why not?" she shot back, her frustration boiling over. "I looked it up online. I'm entitled to half of everything." "Oh, you're right," Dad replied, a slight smile on his face. This is indeed a no-fault state. You are entitled to half of what I own. But here's the catch, I don't actually own anything. The ranch, the equipment, the other businesses, and the cash are all held in a trust. All I receive is a salary and a share of the profits, if there are any. Your mother set it up after we were married. In case you hadn't noticed, she never liked you, and she was only nice to you because of me. If you were hoping for a big payout, that's not going to happen. I could see my mother's face harden, followed by a crafty smile. Fine, if that's how you want to play it, I'll let the lawyers handle it. Besides, Tuck is rich enough to support me without anything from you. I'll just take the kids and leave. I had been quietly listening to this painful exchange, but my frustration reached its peak as I watched my mother challenge my father over custody of Tanya and me. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Bursting into the room, I shouted, "That's not fair. Jake, don't talk to your mother like that," my dad replied, surprised that I hadn't realized how serious the situation was. I could feel the tension crackling in the air. I had never seen my father so composed in the face of betrayal, but it was clear he was breaking inside. At that moment, I understood the weight of the choices made and the ripples they created in our lives. I was thrust into a world of complicated emotions and decisions that would shape our family forever. The love I once felt for my mother was overshadowed by the fierce loyalty I had for my father, and I knew that life as we knew it would never be the same again. I had been listening to the conversation unfold between my parents, and I could tell my mother was taken aback by my presence. "Dad," I began, my voice shaking, "I've always listened to you, but today, I need to speak my mind, and I won't hold back." My father looked stunned, rendered speechless by my unexpected outburst. I turned my attention to my mother, and as I did, a flood of troubling thoughts washed over me, igniting a wave of discomfort. What have I done? I wondered, my voice lowering but gaining strength. What's going on with me? To my surprise, my mother flinched, glancing back and forth between me and the swirling thoughts in my mind. Her expression shifted to one of shame, tears welling up in her eyes. "Jake, you should go upstairs and let your father and me finish our talk. This isn't about you." "No way am I going to be sent away like that," I replied, my voice steady and resolute. In that moment, I caught a glimpse of vulnerability in her eyes. Looking back, I realize it was the first time she had shown any genuine emotion toward me. It was as if she truly cared, but I was too consumed by anger to see it clearly. She had never considered that I might disagree with her plans, and now, she had to confront the hurt she had caused me. "Mother, I have no respect for you," I said, my words dripping with anger. "In fact, I can't stand the thought of living with you and Tuck. To me, my mother is gone." "Jake, you don't mean that," my father said gently, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Jake, dear," my mother added, clearly upset, "just because your father and I aren't married anymore doesn't mean I don't care about you." "I told you, I don't have a mother," I insisted. "She is gone to me now." With that, I pulled away from my father and started to leave the room, but something compelled me to turn back. "I am never going to talk to you again, and I don't want you to talk to me. We are done." As I walked out and headed upstairs, I heard my mother start to cry. I glanced back and saw my father comforting her. "I'm sure he doesn't mean it," my father said, trying to ease her pain. "I'll talk to him tomorrow after he has some time to think." The next morning, my father attempted to reach out to me, but I wasn't ready to reconcile with my mother. I meant every word I had said. To me, she had never truly been there for me, so it didn't matter. Even now, I still hadn't spoken to her since that day. When the divorce was finalized, my father's anger towards my mother was palpable. She received very little, but my father fought tooth and nail for what little she was entitled to. Eventually, the lawyer's fees became overwhelming, and my mother chose to give up the fight. It felt like a small victory for my father, a moment of relief amidst the chaos. Tanya, my younger sister, decided to live with our mother, while I chose to stay on the ranch with Dad. At first, my father wasn't too upset by Tanya's choice, he had kind of expected it. But everything changed when she stood up for our mother during one of the court hearings. From that day forward, my father never spoke to Tanya again. I don't think Tanya was genuinely happy living with our mother. She never voiced any complaints, but I could sense her discomfort with Dad's disappointment. Whenever we did talk, Tanya would ask me to convince Dad to reach out to her, but he never did. I knew both Tanya and my father were hurting, but I felt stuck, unable to help either of them. This entire mess was a consequence of our mother's actions. After my father went missing, Tanya graduated from college and got married, but I wasn't invited to either occasion. I didn't understand why, and that hurt me deeply. It felt like I had lost two important relationships at once. After that, I stopped talking to Tanya completely. Now, I find myself at odds with her about the ranch, and I worry she might come out on top. She wants to sell everything, but I don't. It's complicated, especially with the trust, no will, and my aunts and uncles involved. Since my father's disappearance, I've been managing everything on my own. About a week after taking over the ranch, I discovered that my father's siblings had given him half of their shares long ago because they believed he deserved more for all his hard work. Now, with my father gone, I learned he owned 60% of everything. The lawyers informed me that if I wanted to keep the ranch, my sister and I needed to find a substantial amount of money to pay the taxes. That's why Tanya wants to sell everything. She and her husband can't afford the taxes and don't want to go into debt to keep the ranch. The situation with my father's estate is confusing because it appeared he hadn't prepared for this at all. I was shocked, he was always so organized. When I found out there was no will, it felt like a punch to the gut. Now, the state would decide how everything would be divided, and the prospect of that was daunting. After the divorce, Tuck wasted no time and married my ex-mother within a month. True to Tuck's nature, he bought a large piece of land right across the road from the ranch and built a big house on it, ensuring that my father would see it every time he drove out of the gate. Once the divorce was finalized, my father threw himself into work, which seemed to be his only source of comfort. While I lived with him, he would often sit on the front porch for hours, staring off into the distance, troubled. The bitterness he felt towards Tuck weighed heavily on him. Tuck's behavior became so bothersome that my father started to limit his trips to town and avoided social events altogether. Still, Tuck wouldn't leave him alone. One place my father continued to go was the Cattlemen's Association, an organization that fought for cattlemen's rights. He had been the chairman for 2 terms and was in his 3rd and final year when Tuck decided to join. Tuck quickly moved up the ranks, putting my father in the uncomfortable position of having to face him at every meeting. To make matters worse, Tuck brought Ashley with him to each gathering, ramping up the tension even further. Every meeting became a battlefield, a reminder of everything that had changed. I watched my father struggle, the anger and frustration bubbling just beneath the surface, and I couldn't help but feel like we were all trapped in a storm of our own making. Each day brought new challenges, but I knew one thing for sure, I wouldn't give up on the ranch, no matter what. It was my father's legacy, and I would fight to protect it. The tension in the room felt thick as Tuck made a show of saying goodbye to my ex-mother before she left, ensuring my dad saw every moment. It was just another way for Tuck to flaunt his presence, and I could see how it embarrassed my father, especially with my mother there. It felt like she thrived on that discomfort. Tuck and my mother had been married for about a year and a half when everything spiraled out of control. I was too young to fully grasp my father's reaction or my mother's behavior, but it felt as if my world had turned upside down, and nothing made sense anymore. "Mr. Stanton," a voice jolted me back to the present. I looked up to see the bank manager standing next to me. "We've confirmed the court order, and I can take you to your father's safe deposit box now. I assume you'd prefer some privacy to look over the items?" "Yes, please," I replied, trying to shake off the memories that still lingered in my mind. I followed the manager through the quiet bank corridors until we reached a small vault. He handed me the box, and we stepped into a private room that felt slightly larger than a closet. It contained just a table and a chair, a stark contrast to the weight of what I was about to uncover. Once the door clicked shut behind us, I set the box down on the table, my heart racing with anticipation. I opened it carefully and found two large envelopes resting atop a smaller one. I reached for the small envelope first, eager yet nervous about what I might find. Inside was a letter, written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. Dear Jake, I'm sorry for leaving without telling you. I had very little time, and you were away. I know you would have tried to stop me. I made the choice to leave, and I won't be coming back. The two envelopes in this box contain the full story of what happened to me and my final wishes. The will is official, and there's a business card for the law firm that drafted it. When you read my story, you might think I've lost my mind, but please believe me, it's the truth. When you read this, you can think of me as alive, but don't tell anyone, not even your wife. I am in a place where no one can find me. After you read my story, you'll understand why. In my story, I've asked you to do a few things for me. I know these requests will be difficult, but I hope you can help. I can't change what I've done, but if you can follow my wishes, it may ease some of the pain I caused. I feel deep regret for my actions. Don't worry about me, I am at peace and happy with where I am going. My only regret is that I won't see you or your sister again. I always tried to be a good father, but I know I failed when I vanished. Please understand that I was proud of you and loved you deeply. I loved your sister just as much. Even if you doubt my story, please try to do the small favors I've asked. It would mean a lot to me. I have caused great hurt. I love you more than words can express. Dad. As I placed my father's letter back on the table, I leaned back in my chair, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. Shock washed over me, my father was alive. But where could he possibly be? It's hard to stay hidden in today's world. I had spent a fortune on private investigators, hoping to track him down, but they'd hit dead ends time and again. I felt a rush of confusion and anxiety wash over me. What had my father done that made him feel the need to hide? What regrets haunted him? I thought back over the 2 years leading up to his disappearance, replaying every moment in my mind. Despite the challenges we faced, I couldn't pinpoint anything that would justify his decision. Yet, amidst all the uncertainty, one feeling bubbled to the surface, pure happiness. My dad was still out there, alive. At that moment, I genuinely believed I could find him again. Determined, I resolved to start fresh by hiring the best private detectives I could afford. This time, I felt like I had a fighting chance. It pained me to think that my father felt he had wronged us in some way. I reflected on everything, especially those chaotic months leading up to his disappearance. Still, I couldn't identify anything that would push him to the brink. I quickly rifled through the large envelopes and pulled out his story, which he had labeled my story. Jake. If you are reading this, then I have been gone for 7 years. As I mentioned in my note, please don't tell anyone that I am alive. Explaining where I've been is incredibly difficult, and I know this might be hard to believe, but everything I'm about to say is true. This story may seem unusual to you, but I'll explain why I wrote it this way. You already know about the history I have with your mother and Tuck, so I won't repeat that. When your mother left me for Tuck, it shattered my heart. Losing her to anyone would have been painful, but losing her to someone I couldn't stand made it unbearable. I fell into a dark place, consumed by a desire for revenge. I wanted them to feel the same hurt I did. That anger transformed me in ways I didn't fully comprehend, leading me to make mistakes that haunt me to this day. I'm truly sorry for those actions and ask for your forgiveness. This is my first request. If you cannot forgive me after reading this, I will understand. I will still love you more than any father can love his son, and I hope you can still love me a little, even though I take full responsibility for my actions. Ashley and Tuck made mistakes, too. They betrayed me and tried to inflict pain, especially Tuck, who often rubbed my loss in my face, while Ashley seemed to enjoy it. I think she reveled in the drama of it all. Our divorce was not my finest hour. I should have let Ashley take the money she was entitled to without a fight, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I was overwhelmed with anger and frustration towards both of them, even though I still loved your mother. I wanted things to improve, but I ended up in a situation that spiraled out of control. The reason I left started about 6 months before I actually made that decision. It all began on a night when a terrible storm rolled through our town, knocking out power for about 6 hours. If you remember, I sent you home to your new wife just as the heavy rain started and the lights went out. With tornado warnings in effect, I knew your wife would be scared. That night, your rented house flooded due to leaks in the roof. With no electricity, I pulled out lanterns and flashlights, trying to make the best of a terrible situation. I poured myself a drink and sank into my favorite chair. It was around midnight, and I was still wide awake, the fatigue from the day settling heavily on my shoulders. Back then, alcohol was my crutch. When the sun dipped below the horizon, it was one of the few things that brought me a sense of relief. As I sat there, the soft sounds of jazz wafted from my battery-powered radio, filling the dimly lit room with a warm, familiar ambience. Suddenly, I felt the house shake. At first, I thought it might be an earthquake, but the tremor lasted only a second or two. I brushed it off, figuring it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. An hour later, feeling the weight of sleepiness pulling at me, I decided it was time to head to bed. I had work early in the morning, as I always did. As I made my way toward the stairs, I heard a noise from the front porch. The wind was still howling, so I figured it was just something blown over. But when I opened the door, I was shocked to find a woman lying right by the entrance. She looked hurt and barely conscious. Maybe it was the drink dulling my senses, but I barely registered her appearance at first. She was wearing a light blue jumpsuit, but my focus quickly shifted to the serious injuries on her body. She had a noticeable lump on her forehead, and in the dim light of my flashlight, I struggled to see her features clearly. Her hair appeared gray, but something about her looked youthful. I carefully helped her inside and laid her on the guest bed. I worried that some of her injuries could be serious. "We need to clean and bandage your wounds," I said, trying to sound calm and reassuring. I started to show her what I meant, but she spoke back in a strange accent, words tumbling out that I couldn't quite understand. Her injuries looked severe, there was no way she could manage on her own. "Let me help you," I insisted. I checked her wounds again, noting that while some on her back were minor, her legs and stomach bore deeper cuts. "No, no," she said, shaking her head weakly. "I can't." Frustrated, I replied, "If you don't want my help, I can call a doctor or take you to the hospital." "Please, no doctor," she pleaded, shaking her head again. "Okay, I understand," I said slowly, even though I couldn't quite grasp her reasoning. "You don't want help, and you don't want a doctor. So what do we do?" I pointed to her wounds, my confusion deepening. "I need a tool," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "A tool? What kind?" I asked, trying to make sense of her request. She pointed out the front window. "Tool over there," she said, her voice urgent. "You want me to go outside?" I asked, gesturing to the rain falling heavily outside. "It's dark, and I can't see anything out there." Before I could say more, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device that looked like a compact mirror. "This tool can help," she said, handing it to me. I took it, noticing a red light glowing from its center, aimed towards the window. It seemed to be some kind of locator, but I had never seen anything like it before. "Please find the tool," she urged, her voice growing weaker. Her eyes began to flutter, and panic set in. Despite her protests, I knew I had to call for help. I grabbed my cell phone, but it didn't work. Later, I found out that the storm had knocked out the towers. I tried the house phone, but it was also dead. I considered throwing her in my truck and driving to the hospital, but then it hit me, what if there were others out there who were hurt? She didn't seem to be in immediate danger, so I decided to cover her wounds with towels and wrapped her in a blanket. Taking the device with me, I stepped outside. The wind had calmed, and the rain had softened to a light mist. Following the device's guidance, I made my way down the driveway, through the gate, and onto the main road. A quick left, and a short drive later, I spotted something glowing off the side of the road, about 500 feet away. If I hadn't had the device, I might have missed it entirely. At first, I thought it could be the remnants of a small plane crash, but the debris was too minimal for that. It had to be a car accident. As I got closer, I noticed there were no flames, just a strange light radiating from the wreckage. Having enjoyed a few drinks, I knew I needed to be careful as I climbed out of the truck. I approached the wreck, which looked like it could have been a sports car from its shape. But I wasn't there to investigate the car itself. I was on a mission to find anyone who might need help and that blue tool for the woman. I quickly scanned the area for other possible victims. Given the size of the vehicle, I figured there might only be one other person involved in the crash. After a quick look around, I felt certain that there was no one else. Then I turned my attention to searching for the tool. After about a minute of searching, I spotted the first blue object. It seemed to shine, but when I picked it up, the light disappeared. It was about the size of a baseball. A few feet away, I found another blue object, this one about the size of a thick book. There was a third, roughly the size of a small paperback, and the fourth looked like a laptop. The fifth was about the size of a golf ball. Each time I touched them, the blue light faded. I gathered all 5 objects, my heart racing with urgency, and took one last look around before heading back to the house. When I entered the bedroom where I had left the woman, I found her awake but looking even weaker. The towels I had given her were now soaked with blood. I showed her the 5 objects I had collected. "This is what I found, but I really think you need to see a doctor." "No," she replied softly, yet her voice held a firm determination. She pointed to the smallest blue object, about the size of a golf ball, and I handed it to her. She turned it over a few times before it flashed green once. Then, to my astonishment, she put it to her mouth and drank the liquid that emerged from a small opening. After a few tense moments, I watched as her wounds stopped bleeding. With a steady hand, she took some yellow liquid from another object and began applying it to her injuries. As I watched her tend to herself, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much bigger mystery. Leandra's injuries seemed to be healing quickly. Within just a few minutes, she looked a lot better. The bump on her forehead had gone down significantly, and I was relieved to see the bleeding had stopped. "Thank you so much," she said, nodding slightly from her position on the couch. Her voice was a bit hoarse, and she added, "I need to rest now." I nodded, gently adjusting the blankets around her. A soft smile spread across her face as she closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep almost immediately. After closing the door quietly, I settled down on the couch, ready to stay awake in case she needed anything. Despite my best intentions, I only managed to get a few hours of sleep before waking up around 5 a.m. I tiptoed to the bedroom to check on her, and thankfully, she was still fast asleep. Deciding not to disturb her, I went about my morning routine. About half an hour later, I received a call from Jake. He explained that a leak in the roof of the house he and his wife were renting had flooded their living room and one of the bedrooms. I told him not to worry about coming in, he should focus on handling the damage. I offered to help, but he insisted he could manage it on his own. So, I returned to my chores, but I made sure to check on Leandra every hour. Each time I peeked in, she was still sleeping soundly. When I returned home for lunch, I was surprised to find Leandra in the den, flipping through the TV channels. She had changed out of her previous outfit and was wearing one of Ashley's old dresses. It fit her well, and while she wasn't as stunning as Ashley, she had a unique charm about her. In the daylight, What I had initially thought was silver hair now appeared to be a striking shade of blonde, and the unusual bronze color of her skin from the night before had transformed into a rich tan. It was amazing how a little time could change someone's appearance. As soon as she noticed me, Leandra turned around with a bright smile. "You look much better today," I remarked, not really thinking much of it. "Not really," she replied, "but thank you for taking care of me last night. I was really out of it." "You can talk," I said, surprised. Just last night, she could barely string a sentence together, and I wasn't sure how much she actually understood. "I think it was the bump on my head," she explained gently, touching her forehead. I was pretty confused. I took a step closer and introduced myself. "I'm Mike Stanton," I said, reaching out my hand. "I'm Leandra," she replied, extending her hand cautiously. The warmth of her hand felt nice, and as we shook, I sensed a connection, almost electric. She must have felt it too because she quickly pulled her hand back, but her smile widened. "Sorry," I said, chuckling. "That was probably just static electricity." "Look, I was about to make some lunch," I said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Would you like something to eat?" She smiled and nodded, and I found myself genuinely enjoying her company. For the first time in a long while, her presence lifted my spirits. I hadn't realized how much I missed having someone around, even just for today. As we settled at the table with our sandwiches and fruit, I finally asked, "So, what happened to you?" Leandra sighed and began to explain. "I was driving to New York when I must have hit a puddle. I lost control, and my car rolled over several times. Luckily, I managed to crawl out just before it caught fire. There's probably not much left of it." I raised an eyebrow. "It's pretty much gone now," she added, looking down. "What about those blue things?" I asked, recalling her earlier concern. "You seemed very worried about them. You insisted I go find them, and you didn't want me to call a doctor or anything. Then you healed yourself. How did you do that?" "I'm sorry," Leandra said, looking a bit embarrassed. "I wasn't thinking clearly last night. It was kind of you to look for my things. They aren't that special, really. They were given to me by my supervisor and made just for me. About healing myself. I just took some antibiotics and put some on my cuts. They're healing up now." She held out her arm, revealing some healing cuts, and then shifted her leg to show me similar marks. "They looked much worse last night than they did now under the daylight." "I wasn't hurt too badly," she continued, shrugging it off. "It looked worse than it was. I was very lucky. I think the bump on my head was the worst of it. After we finish eating, I'll show you the things you braved the storm to find. I'm really sorry, they aren't anything special," she said. The first item she revealed was the GPS I had used the night before. "You already know about this one," she said with a playful smile. "I always forget where I park my car. With this, I never have to worry about finding it." Then she pulled out a large blue object that looked like a box of cosmetics, but it turned out to be a smartphone. "And this?" I asked, intrigued. "What does it do?" "It's just a phone, but it's got some cool features," she said, laughing. She then opened a small container that looked like a baseball, which turned out to be filled with small candies. "Want to try one?" she offered. I took one, and it was sweet and delicious, giving me a burst of energy. Leandra began to talk more about the special medicine she had taken the night before. "It's a new drug my company is developing," she explained. "I'm the senior chemist on the project. The ball with the medicine is a new delivery method. Inside the ball is a small tube that releases the liquid when activated." I offered to get her car towed, but she mentioned that her insurance needed to take a look at it first. "I've already called them," she said. "They promised to send someone." "Listen," I said, wanting to make sure she was comfortable. "If you can suggest a nice hotel or motel, I can help with that." She sat down, looking a bit worn out. "I'll leave you in peace," she said. I enjoyed her company, but she still looked a bit weak. "You don't seem fully recovered," I said carefully. "You're welcome to stay here until you feel better. You'll have your own room and bathroom. It wouldn't be a problem since I'm mostly out working, you'd have the house to yourself." "That would be too much to ask," she replied, shaking her head. "I can rest in a hotel." "Nonsense," I insisted. "I mean it. You'll be more comfortable here. Plus, I could use the company." She hesitated, considering my offer. The warmth in her eyes told me she was weighing her options, and I could see a hint of appreciation in her smile. "Okay, then. If you really don't mind," she finally said. "Not at all," I replied, relieved. "Let's make sure you're taken care of." As I watched her smile, I felt a strange sense of hope. Maybe this unexpected turn of events would lead to something meaningful for both of us. "I know I said I'd head to New York soon, but first, I'd really like to take you out for dinner to thank you for everything. Maybe you could show me around the area." I smiled at Leandra, but I couldn't let her leave just yet. "No way," I insisted playfully, shaking my head. "Until you're well enough to go out, you're staying right here. Besides, I'm a decent cook, and it'll be nice to have some company around." Leandra grinned and agreed to stay, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Having her around made the long days much less lonely, but it didn't take long for her to notice the sadness lingering just beneath the surface. As the days passed, she gently coaxed me into sharing my story. "I confess," I said one evening, my voice barely above a whisper, "that despite everything Ashley has done, I still care for her. I would take her back in a heartbeat." Leandra paused, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she began, "the feeling of love is tied to chemicals in the brain and body. If you can find the right balance, you might be able to change how someone feels." I raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Are you saying love is just chemistry?" She flushed slightly and quickly added, "Well, that's just my theory. I've been thinking about it at work, and I believe it might be true. But it's a lot more complicated than just chemistry." I laughed lightly. "If you ever find a way to prove it, you might discover something groundbreaking." The next few days flew by in a delightful blur. I found myself growing fond of Leandra, and the thought of her leaving made me feel uneasy. I knew once she was gone, I'd fall back into worrying about Ashley and the complicated feelings swirling around her and Tuck. I also knew that there was nothing I could do to change that situation, but I couldn't help trying to sort out my emotions. 2 days before Leandra was set to leave, I had a meeting in town for the Cattlemen's Association. "I'll be back around 5, I told her, trying to keep the mood light. "We can go out to dinner as a goodbye gift. I won't be able to do it the night before you leave, though, because I need to handle payroll and meet with the accountants." As I spoke, I noticed a flicker of disappointment cross her face. I wondered if I was imagining it, but it felt like a tangible sadness lingered in the air as we discussed her departure. On my way to town, I received a call about a broken air conditioner at the association offices. They decided to postpone the meeting, so I turned around and headed back to the ranch, feeling relieved to have a little more time with Leandra. Once I got home, I headed to change into my work clothes, but then a strange noise caught my attention, a low humming sound emanating from somewhere inside the house. I followed the sound to Leandra's room, where her door was slightly ajar. Without thinking, I pushed it open, and what I saw took my breath away. Leandra was standing in the middle of her room, and her appearance was transforming right before my eyes. She held a blue object that resembled a cell phone, emitting a soft green light. She moved it up and down her body, and as I watched in disbelief, I noticed her hair had shifted from blonde to a shimmering silver. Her skin had taken on a strange copper hue, reminiscent of something I had never seen before. And her ears were pointed at the top. A realization washed over me: this woman was definitely not from Kansas or anywhere else on Earth. When she noticed me, Leandra turned slowly and smiled. She gently touched my cheek, and the connection I felt when I first touched her intensified, filling me with warmth. Our bond felt deeper, and the energy between us surged. "Please, sit," she invited, and I complied, drawn into the warmth of the moment. As we sat together, the atmosphere around us seemed to shimmer with unspoken feelings. After a while, Leandra looked at me with a serious expression. "I need you to understand how important this is to me," she said gently. I felt a powerful urge to be closer to her, and as she moved to guide me, I could sense the extraordinary bond we shared. It was an incredible connection that sparked joy in both our hearts, making the outside world fade away. Lost in each other's presence, we lost track of time, enveloped in a quiet bubble of companionship. Finally, I gazed into Leandra's eyes, both of us still aglow from the intimacy we shared. "Where do you come from?" I asked, curiosity getting the better of me. She chuckled softly, a hint of playfulness in her voice. "A long way from here, about 72 light-years away. My home is called Tulia." 72 light-years? I echoed, incredulous. "How and why did you come here?" Leandra hesitated, her expression turning serious. "I shouldn't tell you," she said quietly, "but I need you to trust me." I nodded, eager to learn more. "I came here through a special passage," she explained. "We can open small gates to other places, which allows us to travel vast distances quickly. It took about 15 minutes of your time to get here. I'm on an important mission because my people are facing a serious problem." "What do you mean, your people are facing a problem?" I asked, a mix of curiosity and concern bubbling within me. Leandra's gaze softened, a deep sadness washing over her. "Our numbers are decreasing because of our mistakes," she sighed. I felt my heart race. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "As you've seen, we possess far superior technology compared to the people here, but we are driven by the same emotions: jealousy, anger, greed. We created powerful technologies, but their effects could extend far beyond our world. In our struggle to survive, we sought to diminish these negative feelings, aiming to build societies filled with understanding and creativity. We thought we had succeeded, but we were very wrong." Leandra fell silent, and I could feel the weight of her sorrow. "What happened?" I asked softly, wanting to comfort her. "When I talked about how certain feelings are influenced by chemicals in our bodies, it wasn't just a theory. We proved it. We developed a device that helped us find compatible matches for relationships, but we couldn't find a match for everyone. In an attempt to fix this, we created new technology that could alter a person's chemicals. However, we discovered that these changes could only be made once, and too much alteration could lead to serious problems." She paused, searching for my reaction. I felt a mix of curiosity and skepticism, but I must have given her the right response because she continued, her voice steady. "We thought we were improving things, but we ended up disrupting the very balance of emotions that make us human. Now, my mission is to find a solution before it's too late." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, and I realized that this was more than just a fantastical story. It was a plea for help, a connection that transcended the ordinary. I felt an unshakable bond form between us, a commitment to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. The concept of compatibility has always fascinated me. They say that if two people are at least 60% compatible, they can form genuine connections. A higher compatibility just strengthens that bond. We thought we had solved the issues surrounding connection, and we even developed a way to help alleviate negative emotions. At first, our tests were promising. But when we tried to apply our methods in the real world, everything went horribly wrong. Within a year, many men in my world became infertile, and that led to chaos. Countries began to fight over the few remaining men who could help grow our population. Over the past 2 centuries, my planet's population plummeted from 6 billion to just over 100,000. It was a grim reality, but it didn't fully explain why Leandra was here, standing before me. "We've been searching the universe for species that share our DNA," she explained, urgency lacing her voice. "We need healthy men who can help us ensure future generations. We discovered that people on this planet share our DNA, but only a select few men can father children. Statistically, it's about 1 in a million. I was shocked. But I wasn't meant to be on this mission, she continued, her gaze steady. I was just a last-minute replacement when another woman fell ill. On my way to New York, a lightning strike caused my ship to crash here. Strangely enough, that accident turned out to be a blessing in disguise. I found someone who can help my people, and I felt a strong bond with you. I blinked in disbelief. Are you talking about me? She nodded, warmth radiating from her expression. You've already helped create new life with me. It's a boy, and you can know that already. But we've only met once, I protested. Actually, we've met 6 times, she said with a playful smile. But you made the first connection. The other times were because I care about you. Leaning back against the headboard, I felt her head rest comfortably on my chest. On that first night, you couldn't speak our language, could you? I asked. She laughed softly. No, I didn't have time to learn. Since I was a last-minute replacement, I had to rely on a translator. That first morning, when you saw me watching your TV, I was using it to pick up your language. I also learned a bit of Spanish. So, what happens now? I asked, a hint of worry creeping into my voice. Are you going to take me to your world? No, she replied, her tone serious. Our laws don't allow us to take anyone against their will. But if you want to come, you would be welcomed on my home planet. You would be valued, and I would care for you deeply. Would you consider it? The idea was tempting, but I hesitated. No. My son isn't ready to take over the ranch yet. Plus, I really like Ashley. I felt the weight of my words. I know it wouldn't be fair to you. Even though I probably won't get back together with my ex-wife, my heart is having a hard time accepting that. Tears shimmered in Leandra's eyes as she sighed. I was afraid you might feel that way. Even if I'm not going back, can you please stay for a little longer? Please? I asked, feeling hopeful. She shook her head gently. No, I can't. My time here is short. I wouldn't have stayed this long if I hadn't felt our connection. When I looked at our compatibility, I found that we matched 89%. I, on the other hand, matched 98% with you. It's rare to be that compatible, which is why I treasure our bond so much. Leandra leaned against me, seeking comfort in the moment. I still don't understand why you can't stay longer, I said, a hint of sadness creeping into my voice. I need to go back to my world tomorrow before the portal closes. These portals don't open often and will shut after a week. If I don't leave tomorrow, I'll have to wait 6 months for the next one to open. I can't disguise myself for that long. But your pod was broken, I reminded her softly. I have a spare, she said, pointing to a small blue box. Given everything I had seen, I accepted that this box would help her return home. Then, she surprised me with a request. Before I go, could I meet the woman who seems to be in our way? At first, I wanted to say no, but as I looked into her eyes, I knew I couldn't. So I reluctantly agreed, and what happened that night has stuck with me ever since. I thought that showing up with Leandra in front of Ashley and Tuck would make things easier for me. Maybe it would even spark a little jealousy in Ashley, but I was wrong. I knew Ashley and Tuck would be at the country club dance. Ashley was part of the entertainment committee and thrived at events like this. It was her chance to showcase her latest dress and enjoy Tuck's company. Once I decided to go to the dance, I knew I couldn't let Leandra wear one of Ashley's old dresses. Luckily, I had bought a new dress for Ashley's birthday, and it was still in perfect condition in my closet. The dress fit Leandra beautifully, and I put on one of the few suits I owned. As we walked into the club, the guests were clearly surprised to see me, but even more surprised to see a stunning woman by my side. Many of them smiled at me, pleased to see me there. Finding Ashley was easy. She was surrounded by several young men, with Tuck standing protectively beside her. I used to feel annoyed when Ashley received that kind of attention, but now I noticed Tuck seemed quite pleased to be showing everyone that she was with him. Leandra reached into the purse I had given her and playfully signaled for me to join Ashley and Tuck. Ashley looked up when I arrived, surprised to see me and Leandra in her elegant dress. "Well, look who's here," Ashley said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Tuck laughed, and Ashley continued, "What brings you here tonight? If I remember right, Mike, you don't usually like these gatherings. Decided to show up, huh?" Tuck asked, grinning like he had something to prove. "Not really," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "Just making an appearance." The tension between Tuck and me was palpable. Leandra glanced at me, gently squeezing my arm to keep me calm. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself for whatever came next. The dance floor buzzed with energy, but all I could focus on was the emotional whirlwind swirling inside me. I was navigating a delicate balance between my past with Ashley and my future with Leandra, and I wasn't sure how it would all play out. But I knew one thing: whatever happened next, I would have to confront the reality of my situation, both here on Earth and with the connection I shared with Leandra. Leandra was eager to enjoy a nice dinner and some dancing, and I couldn't blame her. She had a way of bringing life to any gathering, and I was looking forward to the evening. "Let me introduce everyone," I said, gesturing towards Leandra. "Leandra, this is my ex-wife Ashley and her husband Tuck. Ashley, Tuck, this is Leandra. It's a pleasure to meet you both," Leandra said warmly, shaking their hands with genuine enthusiasm. Ashley took a moment to respond, her smile polite yet somewhat distant. "Thank you, Leandra," she replied, her tone lacking warmth. Leandra chuckled lightly, sensing the tension. "I wasn't originally planning to attend this event, I was on a business trip. Mike was kind enough to lend me this dress," she explained, her confidence shining through. One of the men nearby, intrigued, asked, "What's your business about?" Leandra smiled and replied, "My team is working on some groundbreaking medicines, and we're about to announce a new drug. I can't share too many details just yet, but it's exciting." I noticed Ashley's expression shift. She always had a flair for being the center of attention, and the prospect of someone else stepping into the spotlight seemed to ruffle her feathers. A sense of satisfaction washed over me. Ashley nodded but then turned to me, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "So, why have you been so quiet at the ranch? It's been a year and a half, you can't still be upset about our separation. I thought you'd see that Tuck is my true love. Our kids are stuck in the middle of all this." With a tight smile, Ashley glanced at Tuck, who wore a smug expression. "I would have thought you'd be happy for me," she added, feigning innocence. Leandra, sensing my rising tension, squeezed my arm gently, her gaze darting between Tuck and Ashley. "I'm sorry, I don't quite get it," Ashley said, pretending to be confused. "Why would you choose Mike over anyone else? It truly puzzles me. But if you think you're in love, I guess making sacrifices is part of it." Before I could respond, Leandra took my hand, her eyes sparkling. "Mike, you promised we would dance," she said, her excitement infectious. The music had just begun, and without a second thought, we stepped onto the dance floor. As we twirled under the dim lights, I whispered, "You're an amazing dancer." Leandra smiled and pulled me in closer, the rhythm carrying us away. We danced for nearly an hour, just enough time for a quick snack and a few more spins on the dance floor. Occasionally, I caught Tuck and Ashley glancing at us, their interest unmistakable. Later that night, as we returned home, I felt an overwhelming desire to spend quality time with Leandra. But she suggested we sit down for a cup of coffee first. "There's something important I want to discuss," she said, leading me to the kitchen table. Leandra placed a small, lipstick-shaped device in front of us and turned it slightly to reveal a tiny screen. "I hope you won't mind, but I have some things to share about your ex-wife. She hasn't been very nice. She was unfaithful and then blamed you for everything that happened. Her new partner seems to have some issues too. I sighed, the bitterness from the last year and a half creeping back into my thoughts. Trust me, I've thought plenty about that, I replied, forcing a bittersweet smile. Now, I need you to listen carefully, Leandra said, her tone turning serious as she picked up the device. I shouldn't be doing this, but I want to show you a way to find closure regarding your ex-wife and her new partner. Setting my coffee cup down, I leaned in, fully engaged. I'm listening. I mentioned before that I can help you understand connections and even change them. This device can read and analyze the chemical makeup of another person just by touching their skin. Plus, if you touch their skin while using it, you can change that makeup. How does it work? I asked, my curiosity piqued. Leandra smiled back at me, her eyes glinting with a mix of excitement and caution. Since you've decided to stay here, I'll show you how to change Ashley's feelings toward you. That might make her rethink her current relationship. I felt a surge of eagerness. Okay, I'm ready. Tell me how it works. Leandra looked at me thoughtfully, her expression softening. First, I want to mention how much I care about you and how deeply connected we are. Yet, I may need to leave you behind. I will still have your child to love, and that must be enough. Are you sure you won't consider joining me? I gazed into her beautiful blue eyes, filled with hope, and felt torn. Deep down, I knew I wasn't ready to give up my old life. I cared for Leandra, but my heart still longed for Ashley. If I could win her back, that would be my greatest victory. Leandra, I wish I could express my feelings for you like you do for me, I said, my voice wavering. Maybe I can find a way to make my feelings for Ashley stronger. Leandra's face clouded with sadness. But your connection with Ashley is strong at 96%. Tuck's connection is nearly perfect at almost 100%. I was surprised to see my connection with Leandra was at 98%. That doesn't happen often. Does that mean I need to change to be more compatible with Tuck? I asked, feeling confused. No, you don't need to change yourself, Leandra said firmly. You just need to help Ashley see you in a better light. My confusion must have shown, because Leandra chuckled softly. Ashley's connection to you is only 66%, while Tuck's is at 75%. Keep in mind, 60% is the minimum for love. If you can improve Ashley's connection to 89%, you could win her back. The idea of having Ashley back was both thrilling and daunting. I could sense Leandra noticed my eagerness and frowned slightly, which made me feel guilty. I have something important to tell you, she said, her tone turning serious. I'm listening, I replied, trying to temper my excitement. I see you're eager, she sighed. But there are two important things to consider. First, it's best not to push Ashley's feelings beyond 89% due to possible side effects. They're not serious, but it's better to be safe. Sticking to 89% could keep Tuck in second place in Ashley's heart. A higher percentage might increase her feelings for you, but you may not want to risk it. I nodded, trying to absorb her words. What else should I know? I'm setting this device to stop working a week after I leave. If you don't use it by then, you'll miss the chance to reconnect with your ex-wife. Got it. So, how do I use it? I asked, my mind racing with possibilities. It's very simple, Leandra began, her voice steady as she prepared to explain. See this groove? Leandra said, holding out a device that resembled a lipstick. Turn it to the left, and the screen will light up. You can adjust the chemical mix by twisting the top, right to increase and left to decrease. If we lower Tuck's connection to Ashley, it might help, but I'm not sure it's enough. If Ashley finds someone else who suits her better, she might just decide she wants neither of you. I nodded, taking it all in. I understand, but how do I make it work? Once you set it to 89%, she explained, just touch Ashley's arm and press this button at the bottom. The change will unfold over 2 or 3 weeks, and after that, whenever you're around her, she'll naturally start to feel more love for you. I took the device from Leandra, grateful for her help. Our eyes met, and I felt an unspoken connection between us that lingered in the air as we prepared to part ways. Before dawn, I woke to find Leandra already dressed in a jumpsuit, exactly like the one that had been ruined. Apparently, she had a spare. "Let's go somewhere quiet," I suggested, wanting to create the best environment for her plan. We drove to a secluded part of the ranch, away from prying eyes. Leandra placed the blue box on the ground and pulled out what looked like a cell phone, tapping on the screen. "Are you sure you won't come with me?" she asked. "I can make the pod big enough for both of us." I shook my head, feeling a mix of sadness and guilt. "I know this isn't fair, Leandra. I wish I had met you first. If I could, I'd lessen your feelings for Ashley." Leandra's expression shifted, a hint of sadness creeping into her voice. "I could do that, but it would be risky. Lowering attraction when it's already strong can hurt you if you're not ready for it." Tears welled in her eyes, and I felt a pang in my heart. "Would you let me help you feel less for Ashley?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," I replied firmly, shaking my head. "I think this is for the best." Leandra looked down, disappointment evident on her face. "Will I see you again?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. "I'll be back in 6 months," she said softly, her gaze still downcast. "If you want, I can come visit." "Isn't it risky for you to travel while you're expecting?" I inquired, concerned for her well-being. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "My people have a 5-month pregnancy, not 9. I will definitely return. They hope I can have another child with you, but I wouldn't even think about that if you're with Ashley."